Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss the United States and Iraq, as well as their relations vis-a-vis, of course, Iran. Also, we've had that assassination of Qasem Soleimani on Iraqi soil carried out by the Americans, and we had the Iranian retaliation again on Iraqi soil. That story seems to now be continuing, where we've had rocket attacks on the U.S. embassy. That's within the Green Zone, as you all well know, within Baghdad. The United States now telling the Iraqis that they are preparing to evacuate their diplomats from Baghdad, possibly even to completely close down the embassy. Is this all a preparation for a possible war on Iran, as many on the more pessimistic side are saying this may possibly be a sign of? And would Donald Trump really want to go to war with Iran just a number of weeks ahead of the November elections this year? Or is this part of something else? Is this just the Americans putting out a feeler or rhetoric against, of course, these rocket attacks and the continuing protests, also minor protests against the American presence, as well as, of course, concerns about Iranian influence within Iraq, which certainly is also an area of concern. Why can't the Iraqis find a way to be sovereign and to have their independent policies while having good relations with both sides, which they probably realistically need to have going forward for their economy and for several other reasons as well? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. I'm joined by Aveen Karim, who is a Regional Information Manager with Intellize. She's joining us today from Dubai and the United Arab Emirates. Joining us from Suran in Iraq is Yadgar Ismail, who is a university lecturer and translator, as well as a political analyst. Yadgar and Aveen, thank you both for your time today. Aveen, let me start with you. What would it mean if the Americans were to completely pull out diplomats from Iraq?
So first of all, the implications would mainly be political and economic. I don't necessarily think that by pulling out their diplomatic mission from Iraq, that this means that it would escalate into a war with Iran on Iraqi soil. I think the main concern among Iraqis and within the Iraqi government right now is that if the U.S. is to close its embassy in Baghdad, that could send a message to other diplomatic missions in the country, as well as other international or even American companies that operate in the city. Because by closing down its embassy, the U.S. would basically be sending the message across that Baghdad isn't safe enough for them to operate, which could have, like I said, repercussions on other diplomatic missions and companies. Another concern is that at the moment, the Iraqi government and the United States are actually on the same page with regards to trying to contain Iranian influence in Iraq, and this is something that hasn't happened in recent years. The Iraqi government has also been showing signs of trying to ameliorate the situation and to control the attacks that are believed to be conducted by pro-Iranian militia. Right. So by removing its diplomatic mission, it would sort of be handing over a victory to these groups by showing them that what they've been doing has been working.
What are your thoughts about this? I mean, what are Iraqis feeling about any possible pullout from Iraq of U.S. diplomats?
Well, there's, thanks again, Mr. Waqar. I think there's a strong feeling of fear amongst the Iraqis, from south to Kurdistan region, and specifically amongst the minorities. The fear is really great, and they are afraid that if the U.S. Forces pull out from Iraq, the vacuum will be created, and we will again witness something as catastrophic as the rise of ISIS or other insurgencies and other groups. Even yesterday, I think the former Iraqi prime minister warned of the new, let's say, group that may rise to power and control territory, the neo-ISIS, he actually called them. So the fear is really strong. And then there's also dispute amongst the politicians and even the parties, and whether or not this is the right decision or the right moment for America to pull out. There is desire, at least amongst the Shiite parties, for the American withdrawal, from the very beginning of let's say 2005. But then we saw that what happened in 2007, and then in 2011 and 2014. what U.S. President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama did to withdraw forces. Now the Iraqis are frightened that they may witness another, let's say, wave of radicalism and terrorism, filling up the gaps and the vacuum that will be created as these, let's say, forces withdraw. I mean, there are not too many American soldiers on the Iraqi soil, approximately about 5,000 to 5,000, maybe 5,500 soldiers, mostly in Anbar and in KRG in the Kurdistan region.
Right.
So I think it's predictable with Donald Trump. I mean, he may pull out just tomorrow, but then as your other guest mentioned, actually, some of the Iraqis think that America is going to declare defeat if they withdraw. But for the Iraqis, there's much at stake, specifically for the minorities. Let's not forget that. I mean, most of those who suffered under the oppression or the rise of ISIS were the minorities, the Yazidis, I mean the Shabaks and the Christians and other components of Iraq.
I know. I always find it interesting, right? And I've done a lot of shows on Iraq, that whenever we talk about Iraq, we're always talking about either the Americans or the Iranians, right? And that sort of strikes me as very sad, right? Because all these years after the fall of Saddam Hussein, you would have hoped that Iraq would have regained its complete sovereignty back, right? Where its government, or governments, I should say, plural, would have enough independence to be making their own decisions just solely for their national interests, and would have figured out a way to have good relations with both the Americans and the Iranians. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, as much as criticism as they may be of Iran, it is an important neighbor. What are your thoughts on that?
No, yes, definitely. It is a bit saddening to see that we still talk about Iraq from the perspective of regional tensions and regional hostilities. But this is because Iraq is key to both the United States and to Iran. What we've been seeing among the Iraqi citizens and how they feel is we've been seeing a year now of ongoing demonstrations where the people are asking for control back and for sovereignty, and they've been demanding the end of foreign influence, whether this is American or Iranian. However, if we look at how embedded Iran is in Iraq, whether it's at a society level, political level, or even a religious level, it's very difficult to remove this Iranian influence from Iraq. Even when we look at the political system, we see the Iraqi government trying to sort of move away and establish good relations with both countries. Prime Minister Kazemi visited both Washington and Tehran, and these talks looked quite promising. But if we look at the wider context, the Iraqi parliament is made up of majority pro-Iranian political parties. And I think this is Kazemi's biggest obstacle at the moment with regards to trying to establish good relations with both Iran and the US, because these parties do not agree with him. They don't necessarily want to have good relations with the US. So I think that's the biggest difficulty right now.
All right, Yad got the final word. What are your thoughts about sovereignty and independence on the part of Iraq, right? Because for it to have balanced relations with both is important going forward?
Well, some experts and even politicians here are really frightened from what might, come out of this situation. The U.S. pullout and gradual, immediate withdrawal of the U.S. forces. It's going to jeopardize it is the Iraqi sovereignty, if it had any since the fall of the former Iraqi regime. Even back then, its territory were bombed and shelled by, let's say, regional powers. So what now is more at stake, we can strongly argue that it is its sovereignty. Iraq is incapable to protect its sky or its ground. Now we see yesterday there was a meeting between the foreign representations at Baghdad with the cabinet and prime minister. He promised and vowed to protect them, but only yesterday, actually, about 8:30 p.m. in Baghdad time, there were rocket attacks on foreign forces and on the KRG capital, Erbil. So what does this signify? It signifies that the Iraqi government does not have its legitimacy or sovereignty as it wants to have. I mean, basically, it cannot protect the foreigners, it cannot protect its population. Let's not forget now, about 2 million Arab Iraqi are displaced in the Kurdistan region, most of which are Sunnis who are frightened and they cannot go back to their homes in Mosul and Anbar and Tikrit in other areas. So what does that mean? It means that, that Iraq, or neither this prime minister nor the others, not even the following ones, won't be able to protect or to protect their sovereignty. They should seek another solution. Whether the federalism, this one region and the rest of Iraq has worked or not, maybe they should work for different alternatives. Maybe they should give power to different ethnic groups or sects so that they can rule themselves and go back to their territory. Let's not forget most of the, most of the minorities, specifically religious minorities, have fled Iraq. And the rest of the Christians have come to the KRG. So Iraq is incapable of protecting its sovereignty or territory. So it needs support from Iran, also from America, whether they like it or not. But then how can these two go side by side? That's controversial.
Yep. And that is the main question. I really appreciate both Yadgar and Aveen for their time today and for sharing their expertise with us, talking about this warning of the U.S. that it will pull out or is already making preparations to pull out its diplomats possibly from Iraq altogether. What does that mean? There's a lot on the table, but as I'd put to Aveen as well and both our guests, it's sad that whenever we're talking about Iraq, we have to automatically talk about the Iranians and the Americans. Why can't we just talk about Iraq and talk about Iraqis themselves? Why is it that this governing system that has been in place ever since the U.S. took out Saddam Hussein's regime, why hasn't there been a government in place that has been solely for Iraqi interests? And if there have been politicians such as that, why haven't they succeeded in ensuring that this governing system, if it does have its issues, that is, of course, for Iraqis to decide. This all should only be in the hands of Iraqis as a whole, be they of any sect, religion, ethnicity, etc. And that is, of course, the main point going forward that will possibly really ensure the country's progress and growth and, again, sovereignty and independence. I'll be back with my final segment after this.